I'm set.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting and compelling story to share with you tonight from Bobbie Olsen. Bobbie Olsen recently had a liver transplant, and she's got really quite a fascinating backstory before that as well. But the fact that at one point in time, she was told she had 90 days to live. And she was lucky enough to get a donor of a liver, and she's doing fine now. And so I thought it would be interesting to hear the story of this transplant and how she's fared with it all. And also we might touch on the backstory as well, because it's pretty fascinating. Bobbie Olsen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to go public with this whole story of getting a transplant. I understand that I read your post on LinkedIn. You've written an article for a legal magazine. Why would you want to go public with it? What's the message you're trying to provide to people?
It's interesting because it's not something I'd originally thought about doing. I've always tried to be, though, in the legal profession, very open about things that happen in life, and very just with the dawn of social media and everybody's kind of efforts to portray this perfect persona or these perfect lives. There was a time in my life that was very difficult. And the most common comment I would get, both on social media or in person because of it, was, "Your life is so perfect. I wish I had a perfect life like that." And at any time, I find at any time in life that someone says that to you, it seems to always be the one most unlikely time that you would expect to hear something like that. And that's how much you really realize what you're putting out there, what you're portraying compared to what's really happening. And in the legal profession in particular, there used to be this necessity to always seem fine, always seem functional, always seem like you had that perfect life. And over the course of the last, I would say 15 years, we've seen quite a difference with people coming forward, talking about mental health struggles, talking about managing the level of pressure they're under in all kinds of different fields. And so it was more in the spirit of embracing that I tried to stay open as I was going through the process of being terminally ill and what that was like. And you also had this overwhelming feeling as you were dying that every day you kind of wondered, is the thing I'm about to say my last words? And anytime you said something stupid, that would be the first thing that popped in your head. I can't go right now. Those will be my last words. And so when the surgery was over, I have a friend who works for the OVA, a colleague, and she asked if we would share our story, because you hear so many bad things about lawyers out there, just in the ether, that, lawyer jokes and that kind of a thing, that she thought it would be nice to share such a warm story. And originally, I thought I saw it as an excellent way to really be able to say thank you to a person who made a decision, and her whole family made the decision with her, that saved my life. And then in doing so, some of the messages that came back made me realize that there was still very much a need to be open like that with people, so that people can realize if their lives aren't perfect, that's normal and that's okay.
Less than 2 years ago, December 21, you were told that there was a 58% chance you would only make it 90 days, and that there was only a 20% chance that you'd be there for Christmas the following year. How did you respond to that? And then you told me that right after that you had to go into a work Christmas party.
Yes.
How did you react? How did you respond to someone telling you you had a 50% chance of dying in 90 days? Bobbie, how did you deal with that?
Like you deal with everything else, you just keep going and try not to think about it except when you have to think about it. I had been hospitalized about 2 weeks earlier at the end of November, and I knew it was serious. I had just been really, really tired. Thought I'd gained some weight, just felt terrible, and went to the hospital thinking it would just be kind of a check-in. And within hours, there was a doctor. He was amazing, but he would come and he would kneel down at the side of the bed, and he'd take my hand in both his hands, and look me in the eye and say, this is very serious. Do you understand? And I would say, yeah. And I try and give him a meaningful enough look that he knew I knew what he was saying, but I just was not ready to talk about it. And it was still a pretty urgent situation. We didn't really know if I'd be coming out, I now realize. And so it had been about 2 weeks of going to his office for checkups when we had this conversation. So I kind of saw it coming, but to hear it, he was excellent, but he was very blunt, which was really the only way you could hear it. And I really appreciated that. But at the time that he said it, it was amazing how quickly your brain just went into logistics. So I was just about to move into a home, and it had a pool, and I was going to rent it. And I was so excited because I never had a pool. So he said, this sounds ridiculous, but this is what happens to your brain. He said, all right, I need you to understand that you have a 58.2% likelihood of fatality within 90 days, but more likely, you're going to deteriorate very quickly in the next 30. And you need to be prepared for that. It'll be fast, and it's going to be difficult. So you need to prepare your family and yourself. And then I said, okay, so how long, if I make it past that 90 days, what are the odds? And that's when I said, well, I make it to 50. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, absolutely not. No, you won't. And so I then started to sort of check in, well, will I make it to spring? Will I make it to fall? And then finally he said, are you negotiating with me? And I said, I'm trying to see if I'll get to use the pool before I die. And that was all I could focus on.
And have you been able to use the pool?
That's right.
Have you? You've been in?
Spoken like someone who's never had to clean one. Yes, so I left, and at that point I had swollen up to about 3 times my normal size. So I couldn't get even into my shoes. And so I knew it was about 4 o'clock, and I had a dinner at 6:30. And at some point, and I don't know Ottawa, I still don't know Ottawa, there's no excuse now for it. But so I thought, well, I have to get in an Uber, get to a store, get to the dinner, do the dinner, get home. And then when I get home, I can think about this. And so I went out, sat down, and then it kind of hit. And I called a friend and cried. But as I was talking, when you can feel yourself going into shock, yep. I thought, well, this is good. I can work with this. And so I got off the phone, and in that moment that I could be calm, called my eldest daughter, who is, she's actually a surgical resident at Western. And she was just finishing medical school. And so I called her and told her, and then I had to go. I knew I could do it only once. And I debated whether I should wait until after Christmas to tell them, but it didn't sound like there was really time. And so I told her first, and she then told my mother and my grandparents and my other children and my ex-husband and my best friend, while I went to do the work obligations that I had to do, and got home. I just got through the day, shook the hands, did the small talk, tried not to look at the phone. My grandma was texting, and it was just, it was a lot for one afternoon.
I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. Bobbie Olsen. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Bobbie Olsen telling us the story of a liver transplant that she had done, and that she's doing great right now. Stay with us, everyone. This is quite the story. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a chat tonight with Bobbie Olsen. She's a lawyer. She works in Ottawa, but she has clients in Ottawa and Toronto, family law. Year and a half ago, she was told that she had 90 days or 58.2% chance that she only had 90 days to live, that her liver was failing, and that she's been lucky enough in the last little while to get her liver transplant. And she's alive and well and kicking. So, Bobbie, tell us a little bit about what happened after you got the diagnosis of the liver problem.
Okay, well, the first order of business was so I had gotten the diagnosis, went to my work Christmas party that evening, and went home. I was staying in an Airbnb because when I moved to Ottawa, I wasn't really sure. So I just thought I would stay for a while Toronto was locked up, and then maybe I would go home. And in between, I had found a house that I fell in love with. It was a little cottage and just beautiful. And when I left Toronto, I'd sold my house with all my furniture, everything. My kids had grown up. I'd had my first one very young on my 20th birthday. And this was now I was unencumbered. I paused for just 1 second.
Sorry, Bobbie, you were saying?
Yes, so I was just about to move into a house and I'd gotten rid of all of my furniture. And so a couple of days later, I took possession of the house and came in. I'd signed for it for 5 years and knew that I now had to get furniture for this entire 3-bedroom house. And I had my daughter coming the next week and another one of my children coming the next week. So I wanted to put enough things in the house that they could picture where I lived and enough to want to visit, but not so many that if I was deteriorated in 30 days or gone, I knew everything I bought that my children would have to get rid of almost immediately. So I went on Facebook Marketplace and just got the basics, used whatever I could find, and set up what I could. And my daughter came in, and on the 22nd of December, we did a specialist appointment. And at that appointment, they talked about, the only step. She explained that, yes, she was terminally ill. She agreed with the statistics given by the last specialist and said, your time is very limited and the time has come to take care of yourself. And I asked her if I should stop working. And, that was the part that really hit me through the whole process was no matter what job you do, you think of it as stressful and you know what your job stress is. But I remember looking at the doctor who told me I was dying, and then looking at this doctor whose job it was going to be to basically walk me there and do our best. And I thought, what must that be like every day to have to come in and have these conversations? I can't even imagine. But as she was explaining the transplant process, she said, you're terminally ill. Stopping work isn't going to make any difference. In fact, it's probably better to stay busy than just sit and think about it. And so that was fine. And then she talked about live donation. And she said that she explained that while there are processes for, you can donate a kidney, you can donate a lung, I think. With livers, she explained that a person can donate a piece of their liver and they then grow theirs back. And then you basically live on theirs and that grows as well. And at the time, I was horrified. And so I said to her, under no circumstances was I letting my children have surgery to save my life. That just was not going to happen. And then I said to her, looking back, I just said to her, can you imagine the strings that would be attached to that? Your life would never be your own if someone saved your life. And I said to her, absolutely not. I will not do that. I would rather just go. And home I went. And it was interesting that when it came time that the person who it was the one person who I knew would never have strings, would never be that person. But jumping ahead, before that, the next step was the liver transplant acceptance process, we'll call it. And so when you're going through the valuation, mine started, I was in the hospital when it started again in March, and it lasted about 2 months, and you do everything through it. You do, all of the physical stuff, breathing tests, scope tests, blood tests, CAT scans, all of them. But you also speak with a social worker. You meet with a psychiatrist, all of these different professionals. And then every Friday, as I understand it, they have these committee meetings. And so the professionals you've spoken with and then the other professionals on the committee look at all of the applications and They probably have a different word for it, and they evaluate, and then they let you know if you're going to be on. So I was finally asked to come in. They do a lot of this virtually now. So I was asked to come in person at the end of April. And so I went in and with my eldest daughter, her name is Victoria, and we sat down, and they essentially told me that I was probably too high risk. And that it was unlikely I'd be put on the list. And what that doctor, she's still my doctor, what she had to explain was that it's not like when you have your appendix out or something on you is sick, they've taken it out, now you're fine. She said it's really like you're swapping one set of health issues for a different set of health issues. And so their job is really to balance when you're at that line that it's still preferable than not. They use actually a mathematical calculation as well. It's called a MELD score, a MELD NA score. And it takes, so I can remember, your bilirubin, your sodium, your INR, and a really obvious one, your creatinine, I can never say it, the kidney one. And they come up with a number. And the higher the number, the higher you are on the list, because the sicker you are. And so when I was sick, when I was diagnosed, I was beyond a 30, which is basically you're going at any minute. And so that's why they can give you those really specific timelines, because they kept statistics on other people with those same blood work scores and how long they lived. So they're telling you from experience, this is what's going to happen to you. And so I remember leaving the hospital. My daughter, who, you never think of your kids as grown up until they're grown up. She's 26, and she just looked at the other doctor and just said, there must be something we can do. Who do we need to talk to? And she went into sort of a go mode, whereas I went the opposite. I mostly accepted that this is what was going to happen. And it was this overwhelming feeling of, I wasn't worth saving. And you thought about all of the other illnesses that people can get where there is some kind of a contributory factor, and whether or not there was this acceptance process. But it was what was tricky about it, and I know I'm not describing it well, but what's tricky about it is, on one hand, it's almost like you feel like you're applying to university, like you're applying to be good enough to save. It's not really what's happening. What's really happening is they only have so many donors. They only have so many livers. They have so many people who are sick that they have to make these judgment calls. They have to know where to put the resources, And so that part was hard. I went back to.
I can imagine it was incredibly hard. My gosh.
Yeah.
But it sounds like your daughter ended up being a take charge kind of person.
She definitely is. But what we did that day, I just said to the doctor, I'm going to look at it from here on in as it was an opportunity, because most people don't get a warning before they go, and I got one. So I said, I'm just going to use the opportunity to create as many good memories as I can.
Excellent attitude.
And that way you can leave people with a bridge over this difficult time of all of these great memories. Yep. So that became my focus. Now I say that like now I bounced right back. No, I went to my friend's condo where I stay in Toronto, and I faced the back of her couch and lay down, and I don't think I turned around for about 2 days. No, I wasn't okay. I was very upset, but accepted it. I got on a plane and came back and went on with life. And it was so surreal, because in law, you're always booking dates into the future. So I would be standing in court or on Zoom court, and they would say, well, are you available in, June 21st? Sure.
I don't know. Oh my
I was
God.
the easiest person in the world to get an adjournment from. I didn't think it was going to be my problem, but I'm kidding. But it was very much always booking into the future. Always, you still had to, because you're still fighting, so you're still getting healthy and making dietary changes and exercise.
So did you have to make a lot of dietary changes or physical changes or anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In addition to the ones you'd expect with liver, the hardest one to adjust to was salt at first. And in fact, hard enough that now that I'm allowed to have it again, I just don't, because I assume at some point in my life, doctors will tell me to stop it again. once was enough. I'm just staying away from it. Everything tasted bland, but it was good. I took up yoga and did some stuff.
And then how did you find a transplant doorknob?
I didn't expect to. What happened is I was called in May, because then people started coming to visit, and it was like everybody was coming to say goodbye to you, but they were coming to see you, but that's how it felt. And so suddenly it was person after person, which was wonderful, and I'm so glad they were there. But I could see that I wasn't being welcoming at all. I was being I just wanted to be left alone. I just didn't want to be around people. And I couldn't figure it out. And I felt really guilty. And then I realized it was that every time you saw somebody, even if you only knew them a little bit, when you go to say goodbye, when I turn and say, well, see you, they go to say goodbye and they'd stop. And you could see that moment when they realized this might be goodbye. And it was awful. And so I just stopped seeing people because I still haven't seen my grandparents since before. I still have grandparents. I have 3. But I still haven't seen them because I just couldn't face saying goodbye to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be difficult with your grandparents for sure, but with your children too, must have been just so sad.
It was. And, at the beginning, the biggest thing I wanted them to know was that I didn't want them to go off course. I mean, they were all in university at the time, and Victoria was about to look to doing her residency, and I didn't want any of them to think they're in Vancouver, Halifax, and Hamilton to London. And so I just wanted them to know that their lives had to continue, and this wasn't something that could put it off track, not right where they were. So my goal after that just became to look as fine as I could all the time so that nobody would worry. And that's what I did. And I essentially did that by working all the time, because at work, everything is fine.
Everything's fine at work. Did the work people must have known?
Yes, they
They
did.
finally told them.
I told them right away.
Not at that Christmas party, but right away after that.
Yeah, next day.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back and chat a little bit more. We're going to hear about the transplant itself. And I also want to ask you about another story that you got in your background about really coming to terms with your Indigenous background and some other stories from your childhood. Stay with us, everyone. We're chatting with Bobbie Olsen tonight about her transplant story and her own personal story. Stay with us.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Bobbie Olsen. She's a lawyer, practices in Ottawa and Toronto, and family law is her occupation. But tonight we're talking about her story about getting a diagnosis of needing a liver transplant, and that she wasn't going to be a candidate. And for a while, she was looking at 90 days to live, or a 20% chance of living a year. But then you actually got offered a transplant. Tell us about the process, if you could. So the story that we were just talking about was lots of people coming to visit.
Yes. I made a lot of Ghost of Christmas Past jokes, not do them. But I would say by summer, I was sort of convinced I was going to be fine. I mean, I knew I wasn't. They told me I wasn't, and that wasn't going to change. But there's always, I watch a lot of movies, watched too much Disney as a kid, and lots of happy endings. And so I was getting healthier and healthier in so many ways. And I think that the challenge became for the doctors to remind me, this is all gonna change really fast again. So they kept saying, you need to go enjoy yourself, go enjoy yourself. But then when they talked about that fast deterioration, that started to happen. And I started to really see it from September. The way I described it was like you were standing in a room watching yourself an inch at a time shuffle out of your body. And you could just see yourself kind of separating from your life. It was the strangest thing. And by Christmas, right before Christmas, that's when I started to go, and I started to go quickly. And it hit a point where by January 2nd, we drove into Toronto, and I sort of propped up on a bed at the Royal York to celebrate Christmas with my son, who's in from Vancouver. And I was looking at him the whole time, and all I could think was, this is the last time we're going to see each other. Like, I could feel it. And then the next day I was going to Toronto General Hospital where the transplant was done. And they had told me in November that I had gotten myself so healthy that my score had gone down. So I jumped down the list, and I would have these crashes that were awful. And they said that the odds of someone passing away who is a match, because it's not just blood type, it's also size, the liver has to fit. The odds of that happening in the few days that I would crash were so slim that, they said, I remember one of the surgeons saying, normally we just take you off the list because it's not viable, it's not going to happen. But we really like your doctor. And I didn't realize how much your doctors advocate for you in these kinds of things, but my doctors were like lawyers and they fought, and in a good way. And so when I went in on January 4th, I had been so sick, I thought, this is the part where they're going to take me off the list. And I thought, you know what, they might just keep me here and painkiller me until it's time. And so every time I went into the hospital, that time in particular, I would always take this big deep breath on the way in, thinking this might be the last time I ever see outside, And so I went in, and I was waiting. And at that point, it was just sort of surreal. Like, you're just so used to it. And then these people came in, and it was a couple of doctors and a nurse, and everybody was cheery. And they said, we have a liver for you. It's going to be on January 30th. You'll be admitted on the 29th. And they said, we're going to be right back. And don't you call somebody, and we're going to need, there's going to be a lot of details. And then off they went. And I sat there by myself thinking, and my first thought was, how do we know someone's dying it's a terrible thing, but it's the first thing I thought was, how do we know it's going to be on the 30th? And then I realized, well, it must be a live donor. And so I kept asking them, but they wouldn't tell me anything, and they can't. And then I remembered that in November, I had gotten a message out of the blue. I would once in a while get a message from someone asking about live donation, but I'd explain it's not a small thing. It's major surgery, and you need a couple months off work, and it's not something I would ever want anyone to do. And so I would send them the link, but I would say, please don't feel like you have to do this. This isn't your problem. And then that would be that, and I'd move on. So I thought about, well, who was the last person to say it? And I realized it was Robin. And Robin isn't someone I see day to day. She's a family lawyer as well. She practices in Toronto. She works for Legal Aid Ontario. And we've met a few times through, at court, or mostly through social events like that. But we kept in touch on Facebook, and, just sort of general day-to-day stuff. And I had put up a picture. This sounds ridiculous, but it did save my life. I had a friend on social media who was struggling with his weight, and he was being really hard on himself. And so I took a picture of what I really looked like that day. And then I did a filtery thing where it looked good. And I put them both up, and I said, I haven't moved from my chair. Like, this is real life, and this is what people can do with it. So don't look at social media and the rest of the world and think everyone else is doing really well, and it's only you. Like, everybody's having days. Just some people hide it better than others. And she saw that picture, and that's when she had messaged me. And so I sent her the link and told her she didn't have to do it, but she had. And I realized on January 4th that meant she had, from mid-November, gone through the whole holiday season and doing that massive evaluation in such a short period of time. I had no idea she was even doing it. And Robin has 3 children and a fiance and her father, and so many people who love her and who would be worrying as she went through this. And so it was hope for the first time. It was amazing. but I was also so worried about how she would do, that it would go well. It was overwhelming, the good kind. But the first thing I thought was, what do you say?
Yeah.
How do you thank someone for that? Like, there really isn't anything you can say. It was incredible.
And so tell us, obviously the transplant worked and you're doing okay, I presume.
It did. They took 70% of her liver. The team, they always say in these things, the team at TGH was amazing. It really, really was. And so it was at Ottawa Hospital as well. I had Dr. Brenda Gottlieb here and Dr. Selsner there. And Dr. Syed did my surgery, and it was amazing. The nurses, everything right down to pharmacy staff, everyone was so well, it was all well orchestrated. What you had to do when you left was well orchestrated.
So they take 70% of her liver.
They told me they would do a mathematical calculation of how much she needed to live and how much I needed to live, and then divide it. And that's all they would say when they explained it, until finally a surgeon, you have to wait for the one without the EI. and he said 70%. Yeah.
And then do you lose 100% of your liver?
Yes. And so they assure you after that, they're explaining how they have to attach and reattach a lot of things to get in there. And so Robin went in. I went in on the Sunday around at noon, and there were tests and things like that. And people are coming by, and everyone just keeps saying goodbye to you. And my phone, I think I got 138 text messages about how, in various forms, and how to avoid it. And which is obviously something I had given thought to while I was dying, what would happen. But got a lot of that. And then she came in at 6 a.m. on the Monday, the day of the surgery, and she would go into surgery. They told me just after 7. And at first they just check her and make sure everything in there is okay. And then they bring me into the neighboring operating room, and it's a whole other team. And then they explain all of the different things they do. But the one line that really stood out was when they said, "We won't make the final cut on your liver until Robin's liver is in the room." And just the magnitude of what they were saying, it was just shocking. But that's what happened. And the one thing I remember the clearest is sitting waiting to go into that operating room. And I don't think I've had lots and lots of surgeries, but never anything like that. And I couldn't imagine being there if I didn't have to be, because I don't think I've ever been quite that scared. And
well, imagine
knowing someone just showed up completely healthy to go through pretty much the exact same surgery was
and give up 70% of their liver for you to save your life.
Yeah, it was.
And when was this? January
30th. Yeah.
So 5 months ago. And you're doing great.
Doing great. Yes. And she's doing great. Her liver has fully grown back. And
seriously, fully grown back in 5 months.
Yes. In fact, they told me, and I can't remember the percentage because I was super sedated, but I remember them telling me that by the time we left at the end of the week, it would be, I think they said 60% back. And then by the end of the 6 weeks or 3 months, completely back. And they checked it then, and she sent me a message and let me know that she was fully grown back and doing well.
Well, that's wonderful news for her and incredibly wonderful news for you. We're going to have to take another break though, and we'll be back. And we're not going to have enough time to talk about all the issues, but we're going to touch on another story that you've got. Stay with us, everybody. We're chatting with Bobbie Olsen about a liver transplant tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. What an incredible story Bobbie Olsen has told us tonight about her diagnosis, about her liver challenges, and the fact that she had a very high probability of not surviving, and that a friend, not like it sounds like an associate, not even a friend, that decided that they were going to donate 70% of their liver to you, and that that operation took place, and that both of you are doing great now. What an amazing story. And thank you for sharing that with us. And I guess the message is consider live donation, because clearly that saved your life. And for us, the rest of us, we should be considering being as generous, as life-giving as your friend was and is. But Bobbie, you wanted to share with us all a different story, a story about sort of where you came from that also was profound. Tell us a little bit about that and how it influenced you becoming a lawyer.
Sure. It's often what you do to get where you want in your career. You don't really think about it. It's just something that you do. Kind of like when people say, how did you keep practicing when you were dying? Well, what was the alternative? It was something to do. And so I didn't realize until having to tell the story over and over for the transplant assessment that it was that interesting. And I had grown up with my mom, like lots of people. And my mom was a foster child. She was part of the 60s scoop. And she grew up in foster care and has numerous siblings who also did. And she had me when she was 17, and we were very close. And then when I was 17, I left and went to Queen's. And I wanted to be a lawyer. When I was young, she worked all kinds of odd jobs and night jobs while she went through school. She's a teacher now. She became that later in life. And I was helping her clean a urinal at one of the jobs in an office building. And I looked up and I saw a law degree and I thought, well, that person's at home and I'm cleaning a toilet. So this seems like a no-brainer for life. And so I was like many kids in small towns, they just want to get out. And my grandfather had been in residential school, and I never thought about family law, and I definitely never thought about worked for the Children's Aid for a bit. Never would have thought that would happen, because when I grew up, those were the people you were supposed to be afraid of, because they were coming if anybody messed up. It was how we saw it. And I went to the Army, I did basic training, and I went to Queen's, and I really just didn't fit. I came from Fort Frances. It was very different. We moved a lot in that area, but never somewhere like Kingston or Toronto. And so I left after first year. I went to Edmonton, worked with the Army, and then I came back after I had my daughter on my 20th birthday, and she came to Queen's with me and through law school with me, and then I had two more wonderful children. And so the road to get there was not an easy one. At one point in Kingston, we had to go to a food bank, and if I hadn't gotten into law school, I don't know quite what would have become of us, but we did it. And now my eldest is a doctor, and the middle one is in art university, and the youngest one is just switching. She was doing physics, and now she's decided she's going to be a mechanic or find something else. And so
what was the 60s scoop?
The 60s scoop is what we now call the number of Native children who went into foster care back in the 60s. It was, as I understand it, after residential school, there was, of course, significant amount of people who were unwell from that experience and a lot of systemic issues there. And so rather than provide supports per se, they just, many of these children were just taken and placed in foster care, where they were shuffled, because there are now safeguards in terms of how long someone can stay in foster care that sometimes work, sometimes do not. But for the most part, the focus now is on a forever home. But at that point, it seemed to be a lot of shuffling. And so they just went from home to home, often terribly mistreated. And they've survived that. And so I always saw it as, the more generations that we can get through, the further away all of that becomes. And living in Ottawa has been quite interesting, because the politics in Ottawa aren't such that you ever look at it as leaving it all behind. So it's been interesting.
Is your Indigenous background important to you at all, or not important?
It is important. And with all of my grandparents, I mean, I had three great grandparents growing up as well, who two of whom had come over directly. And so it was just always interesting to hear what those tales were like. And so, yes, the Indigenous part is very important, but seeing what all of my different family members did, whether they came from England, Ireland, Norway, all of them, to create a situation where the things I worry about in a day, other than this last year, are pretty ridiculous. And it's sort of the luxury of getting to worry about the ridiculous things because of all of the work that was done by the generations who came before me, who came to Canada and built a life like we see so many people doing even now. So brave. And I think it's amazing. And it happens all around us, and we don't even really notice all the time.
Bobbie, you've lived this incredible story. You were saying that your mother had you, I think, when you said that she was 17 and she was cleaning washrooms, and you cleaned washrooms with her, and you had liver challenges, and you had a liver transplant. What's your message? Is it resilience? Is it donate livers? Like, what's your message to us tonight?
Well, definitely donation is very important. I was kept alive by many blood transfusions, and as well as the liver donation that changed my life completely. And it didn't just change my life in the sense that it kept me here, but it showed me a side of humanity that I had not seen. I had seen a lot of that. And I suffered from the miscalculation that if I could just get away, get far away from a small town, get very educated and as successful as I could, bad things couldn't happen to me anymore. And some pretty horrific things did. Horrific. That led to the situation in the first place. And what I have learned is this: no matter who you are or where you've come from, you're going to feel like you're having terrible days. You're going to feel like you're failing, or that you're not doing as well as someone else. And realistically, I have the chance in my job to meet so many people going through so many hard times in their life, and all of them feel that way. And so I thought a lot about what my legacy would be when I was dying for all that time. And other than my children, which is the obvious answer, I also hoped that if nothing else, that I would have left behind that people knew they could be open about their struggles and talk about them and not be made fun of for them, because everybody has them. Doesn't matter what you've accomplished or not accomplished. It's really just about being kind to each other, which is not a new message, but I think with the dawn of the internet, an important one. And knowing that when you see all of this perfection online, that's not real.
Bobbie Olsen, thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling us about your struggles and about your Phoenix almost salvation out of them, and really appreciate the message that you want to deliver. I want to have dinner with you and tell you about my struggles and see what you got to say. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Good night, everybody.